Once upon a time, there was a kind king who ruled a wonderful kingdom. He often visited his capital, always seeing how his people were living. The king enjoyed talking to them and learning about their needs. The people admired their king because he was fair and cared about their needs. He had a wise minister who always accompanied him on his visits and helped the king make good decisions. Together, they worked hard to make sure the kingdom was a happy place. One morning, the king and his minister strolled through the capital. They were enjoying the fresh air. As they walked, they noticed a 5-year-old boy. He was crying loudly next to his mother. The mother tried her best to calm him down.
"Alex, please stop crying,"
she said gently, wiping away his tears.
"What do you want, sweetheart?"
"I want a toy car,"
Alex cried, his little face scrunched up in frustration. The mother sighed, looking worried.
"We will get you a toy car soon, I promise. Just stop crying. Please."
Alex kept crying even after his mother's promise. The king leaned toward the minister and said,
"She is not handling him properly."
The minister nodded.
It's not easy calming a child.
The king smiled and said,
"Let's move on. She will figure it out."
They continued walking, leaving the mother to manage the situation. As the king continued walking through the streets of the capital with his minister, they heard a little girl crying loudly. She was only 4 years old, and her parents were trying hard to calm her down.
"Emma, sweetie, please stop crying,"
her mother said gently, rubbing her back.
"What's wrong?"
"I want the pink dress,"
Emma cried. She pointed to a beautiful dress displayed in a nearby shop window. Her father sighed, looking worried.
"We will buy you the dress soon. But you need to be patient, okay?"
But Emma just cried louder.
"I want it now."
The king watched the scene. He turned to his minister and said,
"Sometimes, kids need to learn to be patient. Just like we do."
The minister nodded, understanding what the king meant. They walked on, letting the family sort it out themselves. One morning, the king had called all ministers and courtiers for a very urgent meeting in the court. Everybody had to appear before the king at the given time. As the clock struck 10, all the courtiers and the ministers had come and seated themselves in their respective seats. When the king came, He threw a glance across the hall to see if everybody was present. The minister wasn't there. He asked,
"Where's the minister?"
Everyone was quiet. One courtier stood up and bowed down before the king and said,
Your Majesty, the minister had asked me to convey the message to you that he will not be able to make it here in time, but he will be here as soon as possible.
This made the king furious. After some time, the minister came, bowed down before the king, and seated himself at his place. The king asked the minister,
"Didn't you hear the orders of being present in the court on time? Why were you late?"
The minister replied,
I beg your pardon, Your Majesty. But my child was crying, and I wasn't able to calm him down.
The king was disappointed with the minister's reason, as he did not consider it to be a valid reason for coming late. So, he expressed his displeasure and said,
"Why did you take so long to calm the child down? Do you know how to handle a crying child?"
The minister said,
Your Majesty, if you don't mind, then please teach me how to do it. It would be great if I could learn it from you.
The king, without any problem, agreed to do it. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the king, as they hadn't seen him doing any such thing before. The king asked the minister to act like a child and cry as badly as possible. And he started crying like a baby. The king came closer and said,
"Why are you crying, my child? What do you want?"
The minister replied while mimicking a child's tone,
Cow. I want a cow right now.
The king at once took the minister to a cow. After a few moments, he came back into the court with a cow. The king said,
"See, here's the cow. Now stop crying."
The minister, still pretending to be a stubborn child, sniffled loudly and said,
I want a tree. But not just any tree. I want it inside the court, right now.
The courtiers whispered among themselves, curious to see how the king would handle this odd request. Without hesitation, the king smiled and gave an order.
"Bring the largest potted tree from the royal garden."
He instructed. Within minutes, the servants arrived, carrying a beautiful tree in a large pot. They placed it carefully in the middle of the court. The king, with a proud smile, folded his arms and asked,
"Happy now?"
But the minister, still acting like a stubborn child, cried and said,
I want a river. A real river flowing right here in the court.
The courtiers gasped, exchanging puzzled glances. How could the king possibly bring a river inside the court? The king, calm as ever, smiled and gave a thoughtful nod.
Very well. Bring barrels of water and create a flowing stream across the floor.
Servants poured water gently from one side of the court to the other. They used small pipes to make the water flow like a river. They even placed floating lotus flowers on the surface to make it look beautiful. The king asked,
Satisfied now?
The minister, still pretending to be a child, wiped his tears dramatically and said in a whiny voice,
I want the moon. Bring me the moon right now.
The court fell silent. The courtiers exchanged glances, wondering how the king would respond to such a demand. The king smiled and replied,
Ah, my dear child, I can't bring the moon down, but I can give you something just as bright.
He ordered the servants to bring a shiny silver bowl filled with water. When it arrived, the king placed it carefully under the sunlight, making the reflection of the moon shimmer in the water.
Look,
The king said with a smile,
here is your moon.
The minister leaned over, peered into the bowl, and clapped his hands in fake delight.
Yay! My moon.
He exclaimed. The king smiled, thinking the game was over, until the minister scrunched his face again.
This is not enough.
The minister pouted.
I want to touch the moon.
The courtiers tried hard not to laugh, and even the king shook his head.
He realized how tricky it really was to handle impossible demands from a child. The king laughed and accepted that it was not easy to calm a crying child down.